Wasn't a text message, it was a voicemail, 43 seconds long. And I almost didn't listen to it right away because I was in the middle of a work call, 40,000 feet over Ohio, and the notification just said, unknown number. I let it sit for maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I think about that a lot. When I finally pressed play, I had to turn the volume all the way up because of the engine noise. I pressed the phone flat against my ear and leaned toward the window. And then I heard him. His voice was low, like he was trying not to be heard. There was something scraping in the background. Metal on concrete? Maybe. And then he said, "Dad, it's me." A pause. I'm in Uncle Brett's garage, not the regular part, the back room. The door has a lock on the outside. Another pause. Longer this time. I've been here since Tuesday, I think. They took my phone, but I found one in a box of old stuff. It only had a little battery. "Dad, I haven't." The message cut off. I sat there for a full 5 seconds just staring at the seat back in front of me. My son was 11 years old. His name was Cooper. And the last time I had spoken to him was Sunday evening, when my ex-wife dropped him off at her brother's house for what she called a family week, something she'd arranged while I was traveling for work, something I'd agreed to because I had no reason not to. Brett and his wife seemed fine. I'd met them a handful of times. Holidays, a birthday party, normal people, or so I thought. It was Thursday. That meant Cooper had been in that room for at least 2 days. I pressed call back on the unknown number. It rang once, then went to a generic voicemail, the kind that's just a robot reading the digits back to you. I called again. Same thing. The battery was gone. Of course it was. My hands were shaking when I opened my contacts and called my ex-wife. 6 rings. Voicemail. I called again. 6 rings. Voicemail. I called again. 6 rings. Voicemail. I typed the text that I'm not proud of, short, capitalized, probably terrifying to receive, and hit send. Then I called 911. I know how that sounds. Calling 911 from a plane. The dispatcher asked me to slow down twice. I told her my son had left me a voicemail saying he was locked in a room in his uncle's house and hadn't eaten in at least 2 days. She asked me for the address. I didn't have a street address. I had a neighborhood, a city, a first name, and a last name. Brett Calloway, married to a woman named Tish, lived somewhere in the Kessler Park area of Dallas. She told me she dispatched someone to do a welfare check and that I should call Dallas PD directly with any additional information. I spent the next 40 minutes on hold with Dallas PD, then got transferred, then put on hold again. By the time I got through to someone who could actually do something, we were beginning our descent into Denver, a layover I now needed to cancel. I explained everything again. The officer I spoke to, I'll call him Officer Tran, because that's what he said when he picked up. He listened. He asked good questions. He asked if my son had any history of exaggerating or playing pranks. I said no. He asked if there was any possibility my son had staged this. I said, he's 11. He left a voicemail from a dead phone he found in a box. He said he didn't know what day it was. Does that sound like a prank to you? Officer Tran said he'd have someone out there within the hour. I landed in Denver at 4:47 p.m. local time. I had a 3-hour layover that I immediately started trying to collapse into the next available flight to Dallas. The gate agent was kind. She found me a seat on a flight leaving in 40 minutes. I ran. On the jetway, I called my ex-wife again. This time she picked up. "Where is Cooper?" I said. "He's at Brett's." She sounded confused, maybe annoyed. "I told you it's a family. He left me a voicemail, Gwen. He said he's locked in a back room. He said he hasn't eaten since Tuesday." Silence. "That's not, he's not locked anywhere. Have you spoken to him? Have you actually spoken to him? Not texted Brett, not assumed. Have you heard Cooper's voice in the last 48 hours? More silence. And in that silence I heard something shift. Not guilt, exactly. Not yet, something more like the first crack in a story she'd been telling herself. Brett said he's been moody, she said. He said Cooper wanted to be alone. When? Our son is locked in a room. I boarded the plane. I turned my phone off when they told me to, and I sat in the dark behind my own eyes for 2 hours and 17 minutes, and I thought about Tuesday. I thought about what Cooper had eaten for dinner the last time I saw him. Leftover spaghetti, 2 glasses of milk, one of those little fruit cups he always saved for last. I thought about how he'd hugged me before he got in his mother's car. How he'd said, "See you next week, Dad," in the distracted way kids do when they're already thinking about something else. I did not sleep. We landed at Dallas Love Field at 8:22 p.m. I had 3 texts from Gwen. The first said, "Brett insists everything is fine." The second said, "I'm going over there now." The third, sent 11 minutes later, said just, "Call me." I called her from the rideshare. "The police are there," she said. Her voice was different now. Flat. Careful. They found him. "Is he okay?" She didn't answer that directly. She said, "They're taking him to the hospital. Parkland." "Gwen, is he okay?" "He's dehydrated. They think he's okay. They said he's talking." I told the driver to take me to Parkland Memorial instead. He didn't ask questions. I sat in the back of that car and pressed my forehead against the cold window, and I cried for the first time since I'd heard the voicemail. Not long, just enough. When I got to the ER, a nurse brought me to him. He was in a curtained bay, hooked up to an IV, wearing the hospital gown that was too big for him. His face was pale and his lips were cracked, and he looked smaller than I remembered, which didn't make sense because it had only been 4 days. When he saw me, he started crying before I even got to him. I held on to him for a long time. I didn't say anything. I don't think I could have. Eventually, he pulled back and looked at me and said, "I knew you'd come." I said, "Of course I came." He said, "Uncle Brett told me you weren't coming. He said you were too busy," he said. He stopped. He looked down at the IV in his arm. He said a lot of stuff. I asked him to tell me when he was ready. He nodded. He took a breath. He said it started the first night. He'd asked to call me just to say goodnight, which was our thing when I was traveling, and Brett told him I hadn't asked to hear from him, so he shouldn't bother me. Cooper said he'd argued back, which I believe completely because my son has always been mouthy in exactly the right ways, and Brett had grabbed him by the arm and walked him to the garage, not the regular garage, the back storage room, which had a padlock on the outside of the door because Brett used it to store power tools. He told Cooper to think about his attitude. He said he'd let him out when he was ready to behave. Cooper said he thought it would be an hour, maybe 2. It was not an hour. It was not 2. The room had a small window up near the ceiling that let in light, but not much else. There was a folding chair and some shelves with old boxes and a plastic container of cat litter that hadn't been opened. The only water he had for the first day was from a bottle of water he found on one of the shelves. It tasted like plastic and dust, and he drank all of it anyway. Brett's wife brought him food once, a sandwich and a bag of chips and a Gatorade. She slid them under the door without opening it. Cooper said he'd asked her to let him out. He said she couldn't do that. Brett would be upset. And then, nothing. Cooper said he lost track of the days. He knew it got dark and then light and then dark again, but the sequence blurred. He spent most of the time sitting on the floor next to the door because that's where the air came in. He said he talks to himself sometimes. He made up stories. He said at some point he started going through the old boxes on the shelves just to have something to do, and that's how he found the phone. A cracked Samsung that someone had packed away years ago, still in its case. He plugged it into an old charger he found in the same box. He said when he saw it power on, he almost couldn't believe it. He had 4% battery. He called me immediately. When it went to my voicemail, he started talking. He told me where he was. He told me what had happened. He told me what he could. And then the phone died. He said he stood in that dark room for a long time after, not knowing if the message had gone through. It had. I stayed at Parkland with Cooper that night. The doctors wanted to keep him for observation. Dehydration, some mild malnutrition, nothing that wouldn't resolve with fluids and food and time. He ate a bowl of chicken soup at midnight and fell asleep holding my hand like he hadn't since he was 5 years old. I did not sleep. Instead, I sat in that plastic chair next to his bed, and I thought very carefully about the next few days. By the time Cooper was discharged the following afternoon, I had already spoken to a family law attorney. I had also spoken to a detective from Dallas PD's Crimes Against Children unit, a woman named Detective Alvarez, who had spent 40 minutes with Cooper earlier that morning taking a recorded statement. She had looked at me afterward in the hallway and said, "Your son is remarkable. He remembered everything." I already knew that. What I didn't fully know yet, what I was still piecing together from phone calls and texts and one extremely uncomfortable conversation with Gwen in the hospital parking lot, was the full shape of what had happened. Gwen had known something was wrong by Tuesday evening. Not the full truth, but something. She'd texted Brett and he'd told her Cooper was giving them a hard time and needed a timeout. She'd accepted that. She'd texted again on Wednesday and he'd said everything was fine, kid just needed to decompress. She'd accepted that too. She did not go over there. She did not call the house phone. She told herself that Brett wouldn't do anything truly bad. She was wrong. When I tell people this part, some of them get angry at Gwen. I understand why. I was angry at Gwen for a long time. But when I look back now, what I see is a woman who made the same mistake a lot of people make. She trusted a version of events that was easier than the alternative. Believing Brett meant she didn't have to do anything hard. Believing Cooper was just being difficult meant everything was still manageable. The problem was that her comfort cost our son 4 days. Brett was arrested that Thursday night, the same night Cooper was admitted to the hospital. His wife, Tish, was arrested the following morning. The charges were serious: unlawful restraint of a child, child endangerment, and after Detective Alvarez reviewed the full timeline, 1 count of injury to a child. The prosecution later added a charge related to Tish's failure to act. It was not a quick process. Nothing in the legal system is. But eventually, Brett pled guilty to the felony charges and was sentenced to 9 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Tish pled to a lesser charge and received 4 years, with the possibility of early release after 2 if she completed certain requirements. The sentencing happened on different days, in front of different judges, which is why the timelines look asymmetrical. Something I know confuses people when they hear this story. The sentences weren't identical because the charges weren't identical. That's how it works. It doesn't always feel like enough. It didn't always feel like enough to me. But I had to make peace with the fact that I can't control what the courts do. I can only control what I do. And here is what I did. The family law case moved faster than the criminal case, which surprised me. My attorney filed for emergency modification of custody within 48 hours of Cooper's discharge. Given the circumstances, given that Gwen had been informed something was wrong and had not acted, the judge granted temporary full custody to me at the initial hearing. Gwen did not fight it. I think some part of her knew she didn't have the standing to fight it. Over the next several months, the temporary order became permanent, with Gwen receiving supervised visitation every other weekend, pending a review at 12 months. She cried when the judge read the order. I felt something watching her cry, but I'm still not sure what to call it. Cooper came home to my house. My real home. The one I'd bought after the divorce. The one he'd always called Dad's place, in the slightly distancing way kids do when they're shuffled between 2 houses. He didn't call it that anymore. He just called it home. The first few weeks were not easy. He had nightmares. He was afraid of closed doors for a while. Not dramatically, not in a way that required intervention, just a preference for keeping things open that I quietly accommodated without making a big deal of it. I kept the pantry fully stocked in a way that was probably excessive and didn't care. He knew the food was there. That seemed to matter. We found a therapist he liked, a man in his early 40s who played chess with Cooper for the first 3 sessions before they ever talked about anything hard. I asked Cooper once if it was helping. He shrugged in the way he shrugs when something is helping but he doesn't want to make a thing of it. Good enough. I remember one evening about 2 months after it all happened. We were watching TV, nothing important, some nature documentary, and Cooper looked over at me and said, "Dad, why didn't Uncle Brett just let me call you?" I didn't have an answer. I've thought about it 1,000 times. The closest I can get is that some people feel something specific when they have power over someone smaller than them, and it isn't discomfort. It's something else. Something they don't want to give up. I don't know, I told him. He nodded like that was acceptable, like he'd already suspected there wasn't going to be a good answer. Then he went back to watching the documentary. He's 13 now. He made the middle school soccer team this year and he's insufferably proud of it in the best way. His therapist discharged him from regular sessions about 8 months ago, said Cooper had done the work, that he had good tools, that the door was always open if something came up. Cooper still keeps his phone charged. Always. Even at home, even on the charger, he checks it before bed every night to make sure it's not below 80%. I asked him about that once. He said, "I just don't want it to die when I need it." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Some things you don't try to talk someone out of. About a year after everything happened, I got a letter from Brett's attorney. I won't go into the details, but the short version is that Brett wanted to express something, remorse, I think was the word used, and wanted to know if I would be open to a conversation. I was not. I wrote back one sentence. I said, "My son knows who he can count on. That's all that matters now." I never heard from them again. There's one more thing I want to say, because I think about it every time I tell this story. When the Detective Alvarez, was wrapping up her initial conversation with me in that hospital hallway, she said something I haven't forgotten. She said, "In my experience, children in that situation often don't tell anyone for a long time, sometimes years. The fact that your son found a way to reach you, and that you listened, that matters more than you know." I thought about that for a long time. Not just the reaching, but the listening. Because I had almost not listened right away. I had almost let that voicemail sit there while I finished a work call. 43 seconds. I almost let it sit. I don't know what would have happened if I had. What I know is this. My son needed me to hear him, and I did. And every day since then, I have tried to make sure he knows, in the small, quiet ways that actually stick, that whatever room he's in, whatever lock is on the outside of the door, I am always coming. No matter where I am, no matter how long it takes, I am always coming. I keep coming back to those 2 minutes. The voicemail was sitting there, 43 seconds, and I almost let it wait because I was on a work call and it came from an unknown number and I told myself it could keep. 2 minutes. That's all the distance there was between me hearing my son's voice and not hearing it, between acting and not acting. I don't say that to torture myself. I say it because I think it's the most honest thing I can tell you about how close it all came to going a different way. Cooper found that phone by going through old boxes in the dark. He didn't sit down and give up. He moved. He looked. He kept his mind working even when his body was running out of fuel and the room had no windows worth looking out of. He was 11 years old and he did what a lot of grown adults wouldn't have thought to do. He stayed sharp when everything around him was designed, whether intentionally or not, to make him feel small and forgotten. That kind of clarity under pressure isn't luck. It's something built over time, quietly, in the ordinary moments when nobody's watching. The way a kid gets taught that his thoughts matter, that he's allowed to push back, that the world doesn't just happen to him. I think about Brett a lot too. And not in the way you might expect. I don't spend much energy on anger anymore, not because I've forgiven him, but because I've understood something about what he did and why it didn't work. He put a padlock on the outside of a door and told my son that I wasn't coming. He said it more than once, apparently. He wanted Cooper to believe it, and for a few days in the dark, with no food and no way to reach anyone, maybe Cooper did believe it a little. That's what isolation does. It makes the lie feel like the truth. But here's what Brett miscalculated. You can lock a room. You can take a phone. You can tell a child that his father doesn't care, that nobody's coming, that he should just accept it. What you cannot do, what no locked door has ever been able to do, is reach inside a person and take away the knowledge of who they are and who is in their corner. Cooper knew. Somewhere underneath the hunger and the fear and the confusion about what day it was, he knew. And when he found 4% battery on a dead phone in a cardboard box, he used every second of it on me. That trust didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of small, consistent things, showing up when I said I would, answering when he called, treating his feelings like they were worth taking seriously. Character isn't built in a crisis. It's revealed there. The crisis just shows you what was already there. Tish brought him one sandwich in 4 days and then walked away from the door. Gwen accepted a text message as proof that her son was fine. And I understand the temptation to do the easy thing, the comfortable thing, the thing that doesn't require you to act. I have done the easy thing plenty of times in my life, but what I've learned, what Cooper's 4 days in that garage taught me in the most brutal possible way, is that the moments when it costs something to do right are exactly the moments that define what you actually believe versus what you only think you believe. Cooper is 13 now. He checks his phone before bed every night to make sure it's charged. I never asked him to stop. Some things you carry forward, and that's okay. What matters is that he's carrying it forward while also playing soccer and arguing about homework and growing 3 inches in a year and living his life out loud the way kids are supposed to. He found a way to reach me from a locked room with 4% battery. I have never been more proud of anything in my life.